I found our original partnership agreement folded into the spine of my mother's old leather Bible 3 days after her funeral. The one piece of paper my brother swore had been destroyed in a basement flood. The one document that could prove he had forged my signature and sold our entire neon sign company out from under me for $400,000. Less than a month after that discovery, I was running a brand new shop called Glowing Betrayal Neon, and he was in the back room bending hot glass tubes while wearing a bright yellow safety vest that I had custom printed with the words "Bent the Truth" in silver reflective lettering across the back. Every single sign we shipped from that day forward included a printed copy of the fraud docket from his felony case, tucked into the packaging right next to the mounting hardware and the warranty card. This is the story of how a dusty Bible and a mother's final warning gave me back everything he tried to steal, and then some. My name is Mariah. I'm 42 years old, and for 15 years before any of this happened, I worked as a residential electrician, pulling Romex through fiberglass-insulated attics in 100-degree summers and wiring breaker panels in new construction with fingers that always had a few small burns. I knew the feel of a Torx screwdriver on a neutral bus, the sound a circuit makes when it's overloaded and about to trip, and the exact code requirements for bonding a subpanel. I drained my entire 401K, $105,000, to co-found a custom neon sign company with my younger brother Danny, because he had the artistic hands, and I had the business discipline, and we both grew up mesmerized by the glowing signs our mother used to take us to see in the old theater district downtown. I remember the day I walked into the bank and signed the early withdrawal paperwork. The penalty alone was enough to make my hands shake, but Danny swore we would build something lasting, something our mother would be proud of. I took a notarized 40% stake and spent my weekends balancing the books while he bent glass and boasted to clients about our family legacy. The notarization happened in a cramped strip mall office with a notary who had a ceramic cat on her desk and a stamp that made a satisfying crunch when she pressed it into the heavy cream stock. I still remember the smell of the ink, the way Danny avoided my eyes when we signed, a detail I filed away but didn't understand until much later. Our mother, Ruth, was a retired librarian who still alphabetized her spice rack, still used the Dewey Decimal System on her own bookshelves, and never threw away a single piece of paper she considered legally binding. She had a small fireproof box where she kept every lease, every warranty, every notarized document she ever encountered. I had been on my own for years, no spouse to speak of, just a quiet little house with a porch swing and a workshop full of half-finished projects, a life I'd built with my own hands, and the steady hum of a well-wired panel. She passed away from a sudden cardiac event on a Tuesday afternoon while watering her tomato plants in the backyard of the house I grew up in. I got the call from a neighbor who found her collapsed by the garden hose, and I felt the world crack open in a way that no amount of electrical training could prepare me for. Within 24 hours of the coroner's call, my brother Danny and his wife Tabitha descended on her house like they were advance scouts for a liquidation company. I was still in a fog, still trying to remember how to breathe, and they were already walking room to room with a clipboard and a label maker. Tabitha wore a silk blouse to the funeral home consultation and kept checking her phone for social media notifications while the director walked us through casket options. I remember the director paused mid-sentence because her phone buzzed and she actually glanced at it, smirked, and then motioned for him to continue. Danny's grief had a strange, performative quality, lots of loud sighs and shaking his head, but when he thought nobody was looking, his eyes tracked every piece of furniture and every piece of jewelry like he was tallying an estate sale before the body was even in the ground. At one point, he picked up a small Waterford crystal vase our mother kept on the mantel, held it to the light, and said, "This might be worth something," then set it down carefully as if memorizing its location. That night they announced they would be staying indefinitely to help me handle things, and by help I would soon learn they meant disassemble me piece by piece until there was nothing left. The discovery happened on the third day of cleaning out our house, when the exhaustion had settled into my bones, and I could barely tell the difference between a precious memory and a piece of junk. We had been working room by room, and the dust of old books and forgotten papers clung to everything. Danny and Tabitha were boxing up donations with a pace that felt more like a dash to empty the place than an act of care. Tabitha kept saying things like, We should get this place on the market by the end of the month, as if our mother's home was just an asset to flip. She picked up a worn black King James Bible from the side table next to my mother's armchair, the one with the cracked spine and the gold leaf almost completely flaked off. The one our mother had read from every morning for 50 years, the one with her notes in the margins and a pressed rose from her wedding bouquet still tucked in the Book of Ruth. Tabitha literally tossed it into a black trash bag, saying, "Nobody wants a musty old Bible, it's just clutter." I watched the bag sag under the weight of other rejected things, a crocheted blanket, a stack of yellowed letters, a small wooden box of buttons, and I felt a small, sharp grief that had nothing to do with religion. After they left for a late lunch, I pulled the bag out of the garbage can on the back porch, unknotted the plastic, and retrieved the book. It smelled like old paper and her hand lotion, a lavender scent I hadn't smelled since childhood. I sat on the floor with it in my lap, and when I opened the front cover, something stiff and folded was wedged behind the decorative end paper, an envelope I had never seen before. Inside was a single piece of heavy cream notary stock and a small handwritten note in my mother's precise librarian script. The notarized document was the original 40% partnership agreement for the neon shop, the one I had signed in blue ink 3 years ago, the one Danny claimed had been lost in a basement flood at his house. The note underneath it read, "Mariah, don't trust Danny. He's planning to take the shop. I overheard him on the phone last spring. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. This is your shield. Keep it safe at all costs." Her handwriting was steady, the letters perfectly formed, but I could see a slight tremor in the last word, as if her hand had shaken with the weight of what she was writing. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that family loyalty should never be used as a weapon. Now back to what happened next. That note changed the chemical composition of the air around me. I stood in her silent living room holding the only proof that I was not going crazy, and I realized with cold clarity that the pressure campaign was already in motion. The very next morning, Danny and Tabitha sat me down at the kitchen table with a pot of coffee I hadn't brewed and a stack of legal-looking papers they had clearly brought with them from out of state. Danny used his soft voice, the one that had convinced so many clients to pay invoices late, and said that I needed to focus on grieving, that the neon shop was too much for me to bear right now, and that he and Tabitha had drawn up a temporary power of attorney transfer that would let him manage the business full-time until I felt strong enough to come back. He called it a limited financial conservatorship, just a little paperwork to keep the lights on. Tabitha squeezed my hand and said, "We're doing this because we love you." The document was a dense 7-page legal instrument that, to an untrained eye, looked like a routine guardianship, but actually contained a clause buried in Section 4.3 that would have given him unilateral authority to sell any and all business assets without my consent after a 30-day waiting period. I saw that clause because my years of reading electrical schematics had taught me to spot circuit breakers hidden in technical language. I know what a disconnect looks like in a wiring diagram, and this was a legal disconnect designed to isolate me from everything I owned. I did not have a law degree, but I could follow the flow of liability like I could follow the path of a ground fault. I let my face go slack, nodded a few times, and said in an artificially foggy voice that my brain just couldn't handle decisions right now and I'd like to wait a few days. The flicker of frustration that crossed Danny's face was microscopic but unmistakable, a tightening around the eyes that lasted maybe half a second. He recovered instantly, smiled, and said, "Of course, take all the time you need. Why don't you come stay with us in the guest suite so we can look after you?" I knew what guest suite really meant. A room in their gaudy suburban McMansion where they could monitor my every move and control the pace of paperwork. I said yes, because I needed to be inside the enemy camp. I packed a small bag, placed my mother's Bible and its hidden contents inside a hollowed-out hardcover book about the National Electrical Code I kept on my shelf, and moved into the lion's den that same afternoon. The first several days under their roof were a masterclass in manipulation disguised as hospitality. Tabitha made elaborate breakfasts I didn't want, avocado toast with poached eggs on weekday mornings, and kept checking in on me every 45 minutes like a prison guard with a mimosa. She'd knock softly on the guest room door and say, "Just seeing if you need anything, sweetie." But her eyes were scanning the room, checking what I was doing, what I was reading. Danny took a lot of phone calls behind closed doors, his voice sharp and anxious until the door cracked open, and then his face would rearrange into the concerned brother mask. I started paying attention to the things that didn't match. Their brand new SUV had temporary plates, but I noticed dealership paperwork left on the kitchen island that showed it was a lease signed only 4 days ago, and the monthly payment was $940, more than my mortgage. The refrigerator had been stocked with high-end prepared meals from a gourmet service, the kind that cost $30 a tray, and I saw a delivery receipt for a week's worth of food that totaled over $300. A landscaping crew showed up to install a water feature in the backyard, a waterfall made of imported stone that the foreman told me was a $22,000 project. None of this squared with the fact that just 2 months earlier Danny had called me weeping about how the neon shop was barely making payroll and he needed to defer his draw. Something was very, very wrong, and the discrepancy between the tears and the waterfall was the first red flag that told me the fraud was deeper than just the forged release. The first piece of physical evidence came from a household accident, and I have to admit I might have helped that accident along. On my 5th day there, Tabitha complained loudly about a flickering hallway light that had been driving her crazy for weeks. I offered to fix it, a simple loose neutral that a $20 non-contact voltage tester could diagnose in 2 minutes. I'd been an electrician for a decade and a half. I could rewire a 3-way switch blindfolded, and watching me competently pull the fixture apart while Danny stood there utterly useless with a flashlight made the contrast painfully clear. I popped the switch plate off, tested the terminals, and found the neutral wire was slightly backed out of the wire nut, a common problem that causes intermittent flickering. While I went to the garage to shut off the breaker, I noticed an industrial shredder parked against the wall next to Danny's workbench, a fellow's model that cross-cuts paper into confetti small enough to use as hamster bedding. The bin underneath was nearly full, and right on top, there was a fragment of paper with a blue notary seal that I recognized from my own copy of the partnership agreement, the one Danny said was destroyed. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my hands steady. I finished the light repair, tightened the neutral, tucked everything back into the box, and waited until they left for a couple's massage that afternoon. Then I went back to the garage with a pair of tweezers, a roll of clear packing tape, and a cardboard sheet to use as a sorting surface. For 3 hours, I pieced together shredded fragments on the concrete floor like the world's most devastating jigsaw puzzle. The shredder had been used on a full document, and the pieces were about 1/4 inch by 2 inches, mixed with shreds from what looked like junk mail. I sorted by color first, then by text alignment, then by the direction of the paper grain. What emerged was a single-page release document, dated 6 weeks before my mother's death, bearing my signature in what looked like blue ballpoint ink. I knew immediately that it was a forgery because the pen pressure was completely wrong. My own signature has a distinctive light stroke on the capital M, a habit from years of signing electrical permits quickly, and this version was heavy-handed with a wobble in the upstroke that indicated someone tracing slowly. I could see the hesitation marks under a magnifying glass I found in the toolbox. The release granted Danny sole ownership of my 40% stake for $0 in consideration, meaning he claimed I had given away my entire interest in the business for nothing. It was notarized by a notary public whose stamp I did not recognize, a woman named Cynthia Keller with a commission number that I would later learn was valid but whose journal would later show no record of my ever appearing before her. Danny had either bribed her or simply forged her seal as well. I taped the whole thing back together on a piece of wax paper and photographed it from 6 different angles. I now knew what he was trying to do, but I didn't yet know how far the rot extended. The shredded document was enough to make me sick, but not enough to void anything in court, and I needed to see the bigger financial picture. The garage workbench had a steel cabinet with a simple pin tumbler lock, a Master Lock 140 that you can buy at any hardware store for $8. It's a 4-pin core with 0 security pins, and my mother, the librarian with 100 hobbies, had taught me how to pick locks when I was 12 as a way to open old antique trunks at estate sales without damaging the hardware. She had given me a little South Ord pocket pick set that I still kept in my glove box for emergencies, and I retrieved it that night when the house was quiet. I knelt by the cabinet, inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applied a light clockwise pressure with my index finger, and slid the rake into the back of the lock. A gentle scrubbing motion across the pins, and the first one clicked, then the second, then a small false set on the third, a little more tension, a click on the fourth, and the lock popped open in under 30 seconds. Inside were hanging file folders labeled in Danny's handwriting. One contained bank statements for an account I didn't recognize, an account at a regional credit union in a neighboring state called Meridian Valley Credit Union. The deposits painted a timeline. A single incoming wire transfer for $400,000 from a company called Lumina Sign Acquisitions, LLC, dated 8 days after my mother's funeral. The transfer had a federal reference number and a clear originating bank. Another folder held the full sale agreement, 23 pages of dense legalese. Danny had sold the entire Neon business, its trade name, its client list, its equipment including 3 ribbon burners, 2 bombarders, and all the glass tubing inventory, its 2 commercial leases, and its intellectual property for exactly that $400,000, contingent on the buyer receiving a clean title free of my interest. The forged release was the instrument he had used to deliver that clean title. I kept flipping and found a cashed check image for $5,000, made out to me, with a memo line that said final settlement. He had planned to hand me that $5,000 check like a generous parting gift and vanish with the remaining $395,000, leaving me with nothing but tax liability and heartbreak. My hands were trembling, but I photographed every document with my phone, replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, and relocked the cabinet. I spent the next several hours on my laptop in the guest room, the door locked, researching Danny's finances. Using the login credentials from the credit union statement, I tried resetting his online banking password. The security question was, "What street did you grow up on?" The answer was Maple Avenue, a street I still knew every crack in the sidewalk of. I typed it in, and the system let me set a new password. Inside the account, I saw transactions that revealed a 3-year pattern of hidden gambling losses, high-interest personal loans from online lenders with APRA over 30%, and a home equity line of credit that was underwater by more than $120,000. He had been writing checks to a casino in a neighboring state for amounts that ranged from $800 to $5,000, sometimes multiple times a week. The waterfall in the backyard, the SUV lease, the gourmet meals, they were all funded by the sale proceeds, which he had already started spending, despite the fact that the title wasn't fully clear. And the structure of the sale was such that the business dissolution would trigger a capital gains event. And because the partnership was a pass-through entity, I would be personally liable for the taxes on my 40% share of the sale, a tax bill that would have been around $60,000 by my estimation, even though I hadn't received a dime. He had not just stolen from me, he had structured the entire crime so that I would be left holding the tax obligations for a dissolved partnership while he walked away free and clear. I needed an ally with legal authority, not just righteous anger. The next morning, I called a business litigation attorney named Joan Whitfield, whose name I'd found through a contractor friend who had used her on a partnership dispute. I met Joan at her office that same afternoon, a modest brick building downtown with a paralegal named Grace who offered me coffee in a mug that said, "Trust me, I'm a lawyer." Joan was a lean woman in her 60s with gray hair cut short and a voice like a straight razor. After 30 minutes of quiet document review, she looked up and said 3 words that changed everything. "We can void." She explained that in our state, a partnership interest held by a 40% stake could not be unilaterally dissolved without either a judge's order or a notarized release signed in the presence of the actual partner. The forged release was legally void ab initio, meaning from the beginning it had 0 force. The sale of the business to Lumina Sign Acquisitions was therefore based on a fraudulent title, and the entire transaction could be unwound under the Uniform Commercial Code's provisions on voidable title. But the critical piece was the original notarized agreement, the one I held. Without it, I would have had to prove my stake through a lengthy forensic accounting process that would take months. With it, I had what Joan called an atomic bomb in civil court. But Joan discovered something even more remarkable when she ran a property records check on the business. 7 months before my mother died, she had quietly visited the same county clerk's office where the original partnership was registered and filed a UCC fixture filing against the Neon Shop's equipment and trade name. My mother had been a librarian who understood legal filing systems, and she had learned that under Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code, a security interest could be perfected by filing a statement that collateralized the assets. She had essentially placed a legal lock on the Neon Shop's core assets, designating herself as a secured creditor with a priority interest. And the filing stated that the security interest could only be released if both Mariah and Danny appeared in person before a notary with a signed joint consent. She had built a dead man's switch. The moment she died, her estate inherited that security interest, and I, as executrix of her will, controlled the release. Danny had sold assets that he did not legally have clear title to, because my mother's UCC lien was still in force, and no one had bothered to search for it. The buyer's title company had missed it entirely, which meant Lumina Sign Acquisitions had purchased a business encumbered by a perfected security interest they couldn't clear without me. Danny's entire scheme was not just fraudulent. It was structurally impossible to complete as long as I held both the original partnership agreement and my mother's secret filing. Joan called the bank compliance officer at Meridian Valley Credit Union and placed an emergency hold on the entire $400,000 pending a fraud investigation, citing the UCC lien and the forged release. The money was frozen within hours. I remember sitting in Joan's office and feeling my mother's presence so strongly, it was like she was standing right behind me, a librarian who had quietly outsmarted everyone. The maximum cruelty beat happened the following Saturday. I needed to know if any shred of brotherhood remained, so I staged a collapse in the hallway of his home while everyone was getting ready for dinner. I had rehearsed it in my head a dozen times. I waited until I heard Danny's footsteps coming down the hall, then I let my body go limp, slid down the wall with a soft thud, and clutched my chest with genuine-looking panic, gasping for air, making small choking sounds. I timed it so that Danny would walk around the corner and find me on the floor, and I expected him to at least call 911 or even feign concern. What he did instead was step directly over my legs, not even glancing down at my face, and stride into his office to grab a manila folder before walking back past me toward the front door. His loafer came within an inch of my hand. Tabitha stood in the kitchen doorway, looked at me writhing on the floor, and said in a flat, bored voice, "Are you okay down there? We really have to go." Then she checked her lipstick in the hallway mirror. I let the moment stretch for a few more seconds, then I recovered, said I must have stood up too fast, and they both switched back into concern mode so fast it gave me emotional whiplash. That folder Danny had grabbed over my body was the one with the $5,000 check, the one they were about to present to me as a final gesture of generosity. In that moment, any residual family loyalty I felt was not just extinguished, it was cremated and scattered into a high wind. I knew then that I would not hesitate to bury them both. The confrontation took place the next Monday at the corporate offices of Lumina Sign Acquisitions, a glass and steel building in the business park off the interstate. The lobby had a water feature of its own, a sleek black granite fountain, and I remember thinking that the whole world seemed to be drowning in water features paid for with stolen money. Danny believed we were there so I could finally sign a notarized acknowledgement of his release and accept the $5,000 check as settlement for my interest. He had a representative from Lumina waiting in the conference room, a man named Gerald who looked like he'd grown up in khakis and never once picked up a tool. He had a Montblanc pen laid out on the table and a pitcher of cucumber water. Tabitha was there too, dressed like she was attending a deposition for a reality show, all sharp angles and false confidence. I arrived with Joan Whitfield at my side and a leather satchel containing my mother's Bible, the original partnership agreement, and a certified copy of the UCC fixture filing. I could feel the weight of those papers like a physical force field. Danny slid a crisp check across the polished conference table and a single-page release document with a sticky note arrow pointing to the signature line. He said something about closure, about moving forward, about how Mom would have wanted us to stay close. I looked at that check, the neat $5,000,000 typed on the line, and then I looked at my brother's face, and I saw only a stranger wearing the skin of a child I grew up with. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply said, "The only thing I'll sign today is a criminal complaint unless you confess right here to the forgery you committed on that release." The air in the room turned to concrete. Danny's mouth opened and closed. Tabitha started to stand up, but Joan held up a single hand and began laying out the evidence in sequence like a prosecutor at trial. The original partnership agreement, notarized and binding, the shredded forgery reconstruction with the traced signature, the wire transfer records showing the $400,000 deposit, the UCC lien that rendered the sale void, and a sworn statement from the notary public Cynthia Keller, whom Joan's investigator had tracked down at her home in a neighboring county over the weekend. Keller admitted in writing that she never saw me sign anything and had been paid $500 by Danny to affix her seal to a blank form. She had kept a little black book of her illegal notarizations, and the entry for this one was dated 3 days after my mother's funeral. Gerald from Lumina turned the color of old milk and immediately began speaking into his phone, his voice pitched high with panic. He was telling someone in legal that the deal was fraudulent and they needed to file an insurance claim immediately. Within 15 minutes, 2 detectives from the county financial crimes unit arrived. They had been pre-briefed by Joan, who had a direct line to the DA's office. They came in with calm professionalism, a man and a woman in plain clothes, and placed Danny under arrest for felony forgery, fraud, and attempted grand theft. He kept saying, "This is a misunderstanding. This is a family matter," as they cuffed his hands behind his back. Tabitha tried to claim she knew nothing about any of it, but her fingerprints were on half the bank documents, and the detective firmly informed her she was being taken in for questioning as an accessory. She started to cry, and it was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her all year. The legal aftermath unfolded with a kind of surgical speed that surprised even Joan. The district attorney had a near-perfect evidence file, including the original documents, the financial records, and my testimony. Danny took a plea deal to avoid a trial that would have meant 6 to 10 years in state prison. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of second-degree forgery and 1 count of fraudulent transfer of business assets. His sentence included 5 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, full restitution of any funds that had already been dispersed from the frozen account, and a permanent criminal record that barred him from ever serving as a corporate officer or owning a business again. Tabitha received probation and a smaller count of conspiracy, but her public social media persona collapsed overnight when the local news ran a story about the case, complete with the mugshots and a photo of the neon shop sign we had built together. Their McMansion entered foreclosure within 6 months because the hidden gambling debts finally caught up with them, and the frozen sale proceeds meant they couldn't pay the HELOC. Lumina Sign Acquisitions recovered their funds and walked away from the deal, leaving the neon shop's assets and name back in my control. I chose to dissolve the old entity, a shell of what it had been, and start fresh with a new LLC. And this is where the revenge became something I could hold in my hands every day. As part of his community service, I filed a civil restitution order that allowed me to compel Danny to work for my new company without compensation for 1 full year, specifically performing the manual labor of bending glass tubes, cutting electrodes, and processing orders in the shop. The judge approved it because the alternative was a violation of probation and a 3-year prison sentence. I named the new shop Glowing Betrayal Neon, and I ordered a custom high-visibility safety vest from a uniform supply company with block lettering that read "Bent the Truth" across the back and chest. It arrived in bright yellow with silver reflective stripes, the kind Road Cruise wear, and I made sure it was exactly his size. The first morning he reported for work, I handed him that vest and a pair of didymium glasses and told him to start on the backlog of custom orders. He had to bend a cursive, "Congratulations" for a wedding client. His hands were shaking, not from nerves but from the early stages of withdrawal from the adrenaline of his scheming life. He has to wear that vest every single shift. Every single sign that leaves our shop, whether it's a beer logo for a bar or a wedding hashtag in pink glass or a corporate lobby piece that costs 5 figures, is packed with a small printed card. That card includes the docket number from his felony case and a 3-sentence summary of what he did, printed on the same cream stock as the original partnership agreement. Customers love it. The story went viral in the local business community, and orders tripled within the first quarter because people wanted to support a woman who turned a family betrayal into a thriving independent shop. I run the floor now. I train new glass benders. I negotiate contracts, and I still work on the electrical side whenever a transformer needs rewiring. The shop hums with the sound of ribbon burners and pump vacuums, the hiss of neon gas filling tubes, the bright buzz of high voltage. And somewhere in the back, a man in a yellow vest bends hot glass into glowing arcs, while everyone who walks through the door can read exactly what kind of person he is. My mother's Bible sits on a shelf in my office next to a framed photo of her standing in her tomato garden. I don't read it often, but I keep the note she left tucked inside the front cover, and occasionally I run my thumb over the ink where she wrote, "Save yourself." She had no law degree, no business background, just a librarian's faith in paper, and a mother's instinct that one of her children would try to destroy the other. She armed me from the grave, not with money, but with a paper trail so absolute that it cut through all the lies. The neon gas in the tubes we bend glows because of a vacuum and a current, and I think about that a lot. A void, once filled with the right energy, creates light out of nothing. My brother tried to leave me in a void of zero legal standing, and instead I filled that void with my mother's final gift and my own relentless refusal to be erased. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. If you want more stories about family justice and the quiet power of preparation, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Until next time, keep your documents notarized and your trust reserved for people who earn it.